We're going over this book. How many of you have the book? Some of you? Okay. All right, I'll be referring to some things in there. But for an introduction, I did not get this assignment because I'm such a great dad. That's not why I got the assignment. I'm not even close. But I have picked up a tip or two over the 64 and a half years of my life. And I also have another benefit in that I was a shepherd. So this is shepherding a child's heart. We actually had sheep, and so I think that may be why Tom came to me and thought that maybe because we had sheep, that maybe this would be a good assignment for me. And as a shepherd, I mean, I think of the verse where Jesus tells Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yeah, of course I love you." And he says, "Well, feed my sheep." And as a shepherd, you should know that there's a lot more to it than just feeding the sheep. You have to help with the birthing of the lambs. You have to help with the getting them to start to nurse, or maybe you have to bottle feed them. Maybe you have to dock their tails. You know, a sheep's tail is naturally long, and that long tail just makes a mess back there. And so the tails are docked very short at a young age. You have to do one thing after another. You have to heal. You have to be a doctor. You have to be a shepherd. And it's not a lot different as a parent. You have to do a whole lot of things for that child. You well know, I'm not telling anything that you don't already know, but as a parent, you have to help with that birthing process. I'll never forget that. When we were first going to become parents, it was back in the days when natural childbirth, or Lamaze, I think we called it, was sort of new. Most of the time, like my dad, when he was a young father, he would just sit in the waiting room and they would say, "Hey, you have a son, and you have another son, and you have another son." But when we became parents, we got to be in there. I was in there for the whole thing. I was in there holding my wife's hand. I was in there, you know, she yelled at me a few times, like, "Leave me alone," and quit touching me and stuff like that. But it was more than kind of neat. It was very exciting to be in there and to be part of that process. And as a parent, you have to be there for the birth. You have to be there to help the baby nurse. You have to be there to change the diaper. You have to be there to heal the scrapes or the bruises or the bangs and whatever that child has and whatever comes up. And you have to change diapers again and again and again. And that's one thing that hardly ever seems like it's never going to end. You have to support that baby. My grandma Bissell, who is my mom's mom, she told my mom when she was just going to become a mother, she said, "Gene, having a child is like picking up a burden that you can never put down." And a lot of us might say, "Well, I don't want to put that burden down." And I don't think my mom did either, but it's so true. Is you don't put that burden down until they're adults. You still don't put that burden down as they grow. As long as you're alive, I think you carry that burden. And I think that's very well said. But we don't have to parent alone. Most of the time, we have a partner. Usually we have a husband, usually we have a wife that can help us with that process. Not everybody, but most of the time. And we need to act as a team. Both parents need to be able to rock that baby and feed that baby and change that diaper. Perhaps most importantly, though, is discipline. Most importantly is discipline. I don't like to hear a mother say to the child, "You just wait till your father gets home." I don't like to hear that. I don't think the child now is dreading dad coming home because he knows he's in trouble. And I don't think that's a good idea. Many of you know my mom. And my mom never had to wait for my father to come home. My mom would take care of business right then and right there. And, I mean, discipline, it shouldn't be like torture where you're waiting and you're watching the clock and, "Oh, man, Dad's going to come home in an hour. Oh, he's getting close." It shouldn't be like that. She would take care of business and move on. Brother Bob Folger, who is Pastor Kevin's dad, used to say, "Handle it, handle it." And that's sort of the way my mom was. She would handle it, and she didn't put it off. She took care of it right away. Authority comes from God. Authority comes from God. Jesus Christ was a leader and a servant, and he's our example. Obeying authority is an issue of the heart. I read some of this book, and I like that part when it says shepherding a child's heart. You know, traffic is my way of looking, or my example of people's obedience. I drive to Mentor daily for work, so it's like 40 miles one way. I spend a lot of time on the road there, and I see a lot of things. And I want us to consider a common traffic light. We have the green, which means go, right? We have the yellow, which means caution. And we have the red that means stop. And my example of that is, you might not remember it. You might be too young. But there was a time when the traffic was, intersecting. When this light turned red, the exact same time this light turned green. It would not work nowadays. That would not work. Because when that light turns red, you always have one or two or three people still going through. It wouldn't work. But it used to be red and green, boom, at the same time. That yellow really meant get ready to stop instead of go faster so that you can make the light. But that's my idea of worldly obedience. And I already asked how many of us had this book. And I'm sorry to say, but when I pick up books like this, or Brother Tom gave me this book, I'm a little bit skeptical. Like, I don't know Ted Tripp. I don't know him at all. And so when I pick up his book, the first thing my thought is not, oh, this must be a wonderful book, and it's, I'm sure it's ordained of God, and it's nothing but the truth. I'm always like, I don't know about this guy. And so that's the way I approach it, and like I say, it's probably not always the best approach, but that's sort of the way I looked at it. But one thing I definitely had to agree about is the child's heart. The child's heart. Sin, all sin, big sin, small sin, adult level sin, child level sin, all of it is an issue of the heart. And God really wants to have our hearts and wants to control our hearts. Good manners can be learned, but what is really needed is to get to the heart. To get to the heart. We're going to be looking at chapter 5 tonight. It's called Examining Your Goals. And before you do, I'm going to have a word of prayer. Lord, pray that you'll help me tonight. Help me to say what I'm supposed to say and not to say anything that I shouldn't say. Help us as we consider these things. And Lord, we want to pray for Aaron Bowler as he's going through this little bit of tough time right now. I pray that you will help him and that everything will turn out fine. I know he's had seizures before, and I just pray that you will be close and dear to him and his family at this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so chapter 5, if you have the book, you can turn. If you don't have it, it's not really going to be too critical because I'll be saying a lot of things out of my 10 pages of notes. I want to ask, how many of us have no regrets looking back at our childhood? I'm not asking for hands, so don't put your hands up. But how many of us have no regrets? I would be surprised if there were hardly anybody in here that had no regrets. I think there's a lot of times many of us have regrets. In fact, I would like you maybe to be willing to share. I will go first, and I will share some of my regrets from childhood, maybe from my high school days. The first one I'm going to look at is sports. Sports. I've got a lot of regrets about sports. When I was a young man, we weren't encouraged to, join a baseball team or anything, but me and my brother Jeff, we saw kids playing, so we went to their practice, and the youth coach said, hey, you want to play? And we said, sure. So we went home and got our mitts, and we went out, and we went to practice. Man, we went a couple times, and they had a game, and we didn't go, and we just dropped out. We didn't stay focused on it at all. We just came a few times, and we let it go. And that was sort of, I've done that with a lot of things in my life. With wrestling in high school, I thought, boy, this would be great. And I did it for 1 year, and I enjoyed it, but it was too hard. I don't want to do it next year. So I let that go. So that was some of my regrets. I also had some regrets in school. In high school, I did not put forth much effort to get good grades. In algebra, I took algebra as a 10th grader. Most of the kids in my class were 9th graders. In fact, that's the first class that I had my wife was in my class. She wasn't my wife, but she was 1 year younger than me, and I did not put forth any effort. The first grading period, we had 4 quarters. I got an E or an F, whatever you want to call it, failing. The next quarter, I got a D. The next quarter, I was back down to the E. And the last quarter, I pulled it up to a D again. And I passed because I was on an upward trend from an E to a D. Not exactly anything to be proud about. Chemistry. I took chemistry, I think I was a senior, maybe 11th grader. And man, that table of elements, so much to remember. Oh, my word. I said, I'm dropping out of this. And I did. What was the matter with me? I mean, looking back at it, it's shameful. It's pitiful. But I did. I dropped out, and I just took something easier. And that's the way I went through school. In church, as a young man in this church, I've grown up in this church since I was in 4th grade. So I've been in this church for a lot of years. As a young man in high school, they had the SMITE program. Some of you are familiar with that, the Summer Missionary Intern Training in Evangelism it stood for. I never went to a single SMITE. Nobody would even guess that. They would say, oh, sure, Jim Jones, I'm sure he went to SMITE. I never went to a single SMITE. It wasn't until it was here in Cleveland that I would come and help out, maybe as an adult drive a bus or maybe make snow cones or something like that. But I didn't do anything. I didn't go on the SMITE when it was out of town and be all in and be a participant. I didn't do it. So those are some regrets that I have. I don't know if anybody in here has any regrets that they want to share, but I'm just bearing my soul. I'm not the example that I would like to be. That's for sure. I'm going to read the supporting story that starts this chapter 5, and I've entitled it A Miniature Majorette. It was a cool, you know what? I knew something was wrong. Have you ever seen Jack Beaver do that? Well, when you get to be this age, that's what you do. It was a cool, brisk fall day. In spite of the light rainfall, it was a vintage Western Pennsylvania homecoming day. The band played. Every group from the future farmers of America to the veterans of foreign wars marched along the parade route. We were chilly beneath our umbrella, but who could walk away from all this homey entertainment? At the end of the parade was a troop of junior majorettes, ages 3 to 5. One near the rear caught my eye. She looked to be under 3 years of age. Her skimpy costume left her body exposed to the elements. She was crying. As the troop marched in the drizzle, she kept breaking rank, running to her mother. But there was no comfort there. Her mother kept pushing her back to her place in the rank. I will never forget the sense of desperation and confusion in the eyes of this tyke as she marched by us sobbing. This mother's actions implied certain parenting goals. We may suppose that she wanted her daughter to be beautiful and sought after. She knew that you can't start too young to prepare your child to fulfill your childhood dreams. This was important to Mom. It doesn't require too much imagination to fill the mom's agenda or to imagine how this girl spent her childhood. I do not know the mother in question, and I am not sure of her specific goals or how self-conscious she was of the things that drove her to make sacrifices, to run alongside the troop, bent over, urging her child to hold the baton correctly and keep in line. I am sure of this. She had goals for her daughter. We all have. There are objectives that direct our choices as we raise our children. Some folks can articulate their goals. Other goals may be implied by the choices parents make. So I've written down some unbiblical goals. The first one is the unbiblical goal of wanting our children to be happy. And I noted here that joy and happy is not the same. Joy is like a much more fulfilling element or characteristic. Happy is very temporary, but we want our children to be happy. That's number one. Number two, comfortable. We want our children to be comfortable. As adults, we want them to have a comfortable life. We don't want them to have to struggle. We don't want them to have to work too much overtime. We don't want them to have to do without. We want them to be comfortable. And number three, successful. Successful in whose eyes? We want them to be successful. The upbringing of children is very influential to success. No shortage of how-to books by experts. They're written and they're everywhere. Look at the ways parents choose to prepare children to be successful. Sometimes they develop special skills. And the first one that I'm going to touch on is athletics. Athletics. It was like this in my home. My home as a father, not my home as a son, but my home as a father. Quote, live your life through your child. I can't remember how many times I was told that. You're just trying to live your life through your child. And that's how I learned the word vicariously. Living my life through my child. Can't that line be used in just about any situation? Whether it's baseball, whether it's studies, no matter what the situation, it seems like that line can be used anywhere. Yes, I want better for my child, but at what cost? But at what cost? There's a saying that says, roosters come home to roost. And that it's sort of like you reap what you sow. It's the same meaning. And athletics is really not the biblical goal that I should have had. The price of poor influences. There are a lot of poor influences in athletics. Poor influences of the coach. Now, I sort of mitigated that partially by being the coach myself. But I'll never forget one Pee-wee football game that we were at, and we lost, and the visiting coach or the opponent coach, whatever, I had known him in high school, and he yelled to his boys when they came off the field, "That's a great job, guys. You just gave all your dads a good reason to get drunk tonight." And I thought, oh, my word. I had to go talk to him. I said, how can you talk? Oh, you know I was kidding. You know I was kidding. But that's the kind of influences that they're under out there in the world. From poor influences from coaches, from parents, and from worldly friends. Time and priorities. There's only so much time in a week. We had 3 boys. Maybe you knew that. We had 3 boys, and we were at the baseball fields every single night of the week. And it almost did serious damage and serious harm to my wife and I's relationship. It was a bit of a stumbling block in our life. We never missed Sunday morning church, but I got to admit that the coach would sometimes come and pick up Jeremy here at church about 7 p.m. I would make the excuse, oh, it's almost time for the invitation. He can go play his Sunday night game now, and the coach would come and pick him up. But we did miss a lot of Wednesday nights, I'll tell you that, maybe almost every Wednesday night in the summertime. And what did that teach my sons? What kind of example was that? How about those lifelong lessons that we learn through athletics, like self-image, like sportsmanship? You know, like at the end of the game when they go through the line and they say, good game, 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 to every opponent, every other player. Like, that really is good sportsmanship. That's a wonderful lesson that they're learning. The lesson of perseverance, lifelong friendship, respect for authority. Oh, you stink. You missed that call. Yeah, real respect for authority. I don't even like to hear myself saying all these things, but a lot of that stuff depends on the coach and the leader of the team. A lot of that attitude and a lot of that banter that goes on comes from the coach, and it trickles right down through the team. The second goal, or the first one was developing special skills. And like I just dwelt on athletics. There could be other special goals. There could be other things that we want our kids to to get absorbed in. This one is psychological goals, building self-esteem. Building self-esteem. Here's some self-esteem for you. Genesis 1:27 says that we are made in the image of God. That should give us some self-esteem right there. Made in the image of God. Psalms 139. I might be supposed to be reading these things because I have them marked. Psalms 139, verse 13. Verse 14. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You know, growing up as kids in my parents' house, we were taught to be kind to each other. And you can imagine there are 6 kids. I'm the oldest of 6. And it wasn't always easy. Sometimes it was crowded. We lived in Parma for a long time where we had 4 boys in one bedroom. And my sister shared her bedroom with the baby. But it was crowded, and we weren't always kind one to another. In fact, there were some words that we were not allowed to say, and we would catch ourselves saying, "You fat pig." And if my mom heard that, we were in trouble. How about shut up? We were not allowed to say that. There are a few other words I'm still afraid to say even in here. Philippians 2:3 says, to esteem others better than yourselves. I probably should be reading that one too. I've got it. Philippians 2:3. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves. And that's what we should do. We should esteem others or treat others better than ourselves. Speaking of psychological, I haven't raised kids in a long time. My youngest is going to be 42 this year. He's almost as old as Tom Goodman. I could almost be Tom Goodman's dad. I'll bet you that I got married the same year he graduated from high school. I'll have to remind him of that sometime. I'm old enough to be your dad. But I haven't raised kids in a long time. But speaking from my heart, at the age of 50, I ran into a tough time. I ran into a tough time in my life. And I thought I knew why. And I sought help. I went to doctors. I went to Christian counselors, trying to get to the bottom of this depression that I was facing. And I now believe, and I believed shortly after that time, that it was all because of unconfessed sin. Unconfessed sin. And 1 Peter 5:7 meant so much to me as I came out of that, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. It's an excellent verse. I say this so that at some point I can be a help to others, because I think it's important for people to know that they can overcome this thing. All right, the next unbiblical goal is talking about saved children. And it sort of seems like this can be a touchy subject. Of course we want our children to trust God. We want them to be saved. But we don't need to rush it. We don't need to push it. And I don't know how frequently that happens, and maybe it doesn't happen at all. But being saved at a young age does not mean that you will not face trials or tribulations or temptations. On the other hand, don't delay it either. If your child feels the need and feels the urge and feels the conviction to be saved, then by all means. I mean, many childhood salvation decisions are sincere. But what I'm saying is that the job of the parents to raise godly children, and that's what we're talking about in this book, to raise godly children does not change just because Junior got saved. He's still a sinner, just like his dad and his mom, and there's still a lot of things that we're going to go through with raising our children, even though they're saved. The next one is family worship. Family worship. And most all of the goals that we talk about tonight, I have 2 experiences. I have the experience of when I was the father, and I have the experience of when I was the son under my mom and dad, and how they did things. And most of the time, I have to admit, they did things better than I did. And in the family worship category, they definitely did things better than I did. And honestly, that would be mostly attributed to my mom. My dad was a truck driver. He worked long hours. He often got home late. Time for devotions, maybe we couldn't always wait for him, and my mom didn't hesitate. She would take charge, and she would do it. Anything that my dad could do, my mom could do too. Many evenings, devotions were handled by Mom. Sometimes the worship doesn't match the walkship. And we have to be careful about that. We have to be careful that we don't teach or preach or tell our kids to do something a certain way and then not do it that way ourselves. They're watching what we do even more than they're listening to what we say. Next one is well-behaved children. Well-behaved children. I have an example of this. Some of you may know Pastor Joel Royalty from Broadview Heights Baptist. And I go to the rec center in Broadview Heights. I live in Broadview Heights. And I met this guy. We were walking together on the track, and he told me where he lived. And he said, I live right over by that Baptist church. Oh, I know where you live. I know that development. Yeah. And so we were talking about that, and I said, I know the pastor of that church. Oh, you do? Royalty? You know him? I said, yeah. He said, he's got some weird ideas. He's kind of out there on some of his ideas. So obviously they had talked. He said, but I got to tell you one thing. His kids are great. His kids will do anything. And as a parent, what parent doesn't want to hear that? I had to share that with Joel one time, and I think he did appreciate it. And it's true. He has wonderful kids. He has wonderful kids. Who can argue against well-mannered kids? Have you ever reprimanded your child for someone else's sake? I have. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I mentioned that earlier. Being the firstborn has its advantages, not the least of which is the birthright. My siblings will certainly be surprised someday when that will is read and they find out that I'm getting almost everything. But being first also has its challenges. When that first grandchild came along, which was my son, when that first grandchild came along and did not show the proper manners or the proper appreciation for a gift or the proper patience, it was duly noted by my siblings. They all knew the reprimand that they would have gotten if they had done the very same thing. And so I heard the oh man, look what they're shaking their heads. I mean, Joyce and I, we would hear it, we would see it. They weren't necessarily doing it to us, but we could see it. And the difference was my siblings, they were remembering how they were reprimanded when they were teenagers. You know, and I just had a toddler here, and they thought that my toddler should have better manners than that. I mean, I can remember a time at Christmas when he got a gift and he said, I don't want that. And he put it down on the ground and walked away, and I was like, oh my, how embarrassing. But he's a kid. I mean, I think we went over that. I don't think he would still do it today at 42. I'd like to think that he wouldn't. But we certainly felt that. And at the time, yeah, I would say, now, Jeremy, you don't talk like that. You go tell Grandma thank you. But I didn't want it, but I didn't like it. You know, I would reprimand him because everybody else's eyes were on me. No child learns these lessons or these goals with one instructional session. It takes time to affect the heart. Just like skipping supper one day or fasting for a whole day is not how you start a biblical or an effective weight loss program, okay? That's not the way you start an effective weight loss program, is just by skipping a meal or skipping a whole day's worth of meals. The next category, the next unbiblical goal is good education. Good education. You know, there are plenty of parents who plan for their elementary students to have a great college education, to come out of college with a degree, probably at the top of their class, and they put big emphasis on grades. They develop close relationships with all the teachers so that teacher will let them know if anything starts to go astray, that teacher will let them know and keep junior on track. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but proper priorities are needed. You know, we were married right out of high school. I was 19. Joyce had just graduated. She was 18. And I don't recommend that to everybody. If a young couple came up to me and said, hey, what do you think of this idea? I would say, maybe give it a little more time. Let things develop a little bit more. But hey, I can tell you it worked for us. It worked for us. That was more than 45 years ago. And we've never looked back. You know, I didn't go to any college, any secondary education, nothing at all until this past winter, when with the encouragement of a classmate, he convinced me that Nehemiah would be a great class to take at HBI, and I did, and he was right. It was good. It was a very good experience. I got an A. I'm kind of proud to say I got an A in the class. My report card is still on the refrigerator right now, and I'm kind of proud of that. But growing up in this church when we were kids, there was another family. They had 7 kids, we had 6 kids, and looking back, is the last time I had any contact with them, they only had 2 kids that had gone to college, gotten their college degree, and both of those guys were unemployed. And I'm not saying, you know, college isn't for everybody, and college isn't, and grades isn't, you know, the magic to success, that's for certain. But once again, it's a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of the brain. Control. I thought this one was a little bit funny. In fact, I think I'm going to read this. It's just a short paragraph. Some parents have no noble goal at all. They simply want to control their children. These parents want their children to mind, to behave, to be good, to be nice. Doesn't sound so bad to me so far. They remind their children of how things were when they were youngsters. Frequently, they employ the tried and true method of discipline. Whatever their parents did, that seemed to work. They want children who are manageable. They want them to do the right thing, whatever that is at the moment. The bottom line is to control their kids, but the control is not directed towards specific character development objectives. The concern is personal convenience and public appearance. Once again, you know, I didn't write the book, and my first thought is, yes, I want to control my young children. I want to guide them. I want my kids that are learning how to ride a bike to have training wheels. I think that's what training wheels do. They control the bike. They keep it from tipping over. And I think some of those controls are good. They're not meant to be left on the bike for years and years. They're to be put on there just for learning, just when the child is learning how to ride that bike, but for a short time. And in truth, and you've heard this 100 times now, I'll try to only say it once, you really only have a short time. The time that you have raising your children will be over much sooner than you expect. It's a short time. All right. Perhaps every generation says something like this. Our next category is a biblical warning against cultural influence. I don't know if it's time for me to look at my clock or if that clock is right. A biblical warning against cultural influence. Perhaps every generation says something like this. I thought it was tough in my day, but man, oh man, I don't know how they raise kids in this generation. It's hard to argue in these days that we do face some of the hardest battles for our children that we've ever had. In the Old Testament, God always wanted the enemy of Israel, to be utterly destroyed. He didn't want anything left. He knew that if there was anything left, that it would come back and it would draw his people away from him. The old farmer would say, One bad apple spoils the whole basket or the whole bushel or the whole whatever. One bad apple. That's true. Or we would read that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump, the yeast. And in the Bible, as you know, it's a picture of sin. You allow a little sin, and it's not long before it grows big. And now it's really hard to get rid of. When I was growing up, no kids that I knew of had two mommies or two daddies. And I'm really not sure if what we're led to believe or what we read or what we hear on the news, if it's as prevalent as we're led to believe in this day and age, or the gender confusion that's going on. And I feel sorry for the kids. The kids are so confused and so mixed up because of the sinful adults in this world. So, if I've gone over all these bad or unbiblical goals, maybe we should have some kind of a worthy biblical goal. In 1 Corinthians 10:31, it says, "Whatsoever you do, do it all for the glory of God." In Matthew 22:37, "Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind." I'm going to read Hebrews. Finally, I'm remembering to read it when I'm supposed to. Hebrews 12, verse 1. "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race which is set before us." Some of these are what I would consider biblical goals, worthy goals. The book says, as a goal, it says, to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. I'm not going to argue against that. That sounds like a worthy goal. Micah chapter 6 and verse 8. Pastor Pete mentioned this. Brother John Blankenship in our cultural class has gone over this the past few weeks. It's three things: do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. These all seem to be good and worthy goals. I think that most of us would agree that these goals are not always so easy in today's culture, in today's world. Many times we ourselves are guilty of giving our kids too much. Each of us has a childhood memory of things that we wanted, but we never got. And it's not easy, but we must resist the temptation to give our kids everything that they want. I don't think that I must explain myself here. Materialism is really idolatry. We send mixed signals. We can give and say, "Oh, but only Jesus can really satisfy you," while we're giving and giving and giving. Gifts are one of the love languages. So, I'm certainly not against gifts, but I think that there needs to be a balance. I think that kids need to know that these gifts cost money, that these gifts aren't just free, and they need to learn to work. And maybe that's a little older than some of the kids are that I'm talking to the parents of now. But there needs to be a balance. The book author here warns of teaching kids to obey parents or authority just for the approval of that authority, when they should obey to honor and glorify God instead. On the flip side, parents represent God to their children. I know my parents represented God to me. That's the way I felt about it. Biblical parenting teaches children to entrust themselves to God's care, His protection, and His provision. We need to talk to our kids. We need to explain to our kids our giving to the church, our giving to the Lord, our giving of our time, why we go to church 3 times or more a week. It needs to be explained. They need to understand that kind of thing. All right, and now we have some questions here at the end that we're going to try to go over some and see what we can come up with here. All right, so question 1. These are application questions for chapter 5. Tom Goodman, when he gave me this lesson, he said, if you can, by any chance, do 5 and 6. Well, we're just going to get through 5, and I really didn't plan to do 6. It's a lot of the similar stuff, but it's arguing biblical goals against unbiblical goals. So I'm not sure if he's going to hit that next week or not. But question number 1, how do you define success? How would your child complete this sentence? What Mom and Dad want for me is, and I don't know if anybody in here is going to be willing to answer out loud, but I'm going to go ahead and give my answers. Maybe I'm afraid to ask, but I would like to think that my sons would say that Dad wanted us to do right and to do God's will. I would hope that they would say that before they would say Dad wanted us to be professional baseball players, because sometimes people would think that that was my goal for my kids. And I mean, that wouldn't have disappointed me, I'll be honest about that, but I really want them to do right and to do God's will. Question number 2 is, you are pushed and pulled by the things that are listed under unbiblical goals. Which of these unbiblical goals influences your parenting the most adversely? Those 3 goals I had written was happy, making our children happy, comfortable, or successful. And I think most adversely would be trying to make my children happy. That's such a temporary thing. It's such a, it's not lasting. And I think of an example of something happy. When you go to the ice cream place and you get that cone or you get that sundae or you get that milkshake, and there it is full, and you take that first sip or that first lick or that first spoon, you are happy. But it's only a couple of minutes, and you're taking that last sip and out of the bottom of it, and now you're not happy anymore. It's so temporary, so temporary. My personal stumbling block would be successful, would be wanting my child to be successful, because there's so many different ways to judge success. And there's so many different, in success in whose eyes? I want them to be successful in God's eyes. That's really what I want. And I hope that that's what they would realize. Number 3 is, what makes me tick? What makes me tick? I can remember as a younger man having 3 areas of my life that were always producing some type of feelings. All right, so my first one would be physical. Is my weight under control? Is my strength, my endurance? Does my hair look good? Stuff like that, physical things. Next would be financial. Is the checkbook got black ink in it instead of red ink? And that's another area. Faithful giving to God is so important. My wife, I've written here, is such a hard worker. She's always been a contributor to our family finances. Letter C, or my third one, is spiritual. So physical, financial, spiritual. My walk with God. Is your heart right with God? That's the song we sing. Is your heart right with God? And if you could be on top of all 3 of if I could be on top of all 3 of these areas, that's where I would feel. That's what would make me tick. And then question number 4, like Old Testament Israel, you are affected by the culture around you. How has the culture impacted your view of children and your goals for your children? I wrote, current culture. I think this might be an old man thing, but this world is a mess. But let me tell you something. Last Wednesday here in church was a kindergarten graduation. And that was a blessing to my heart. I have no kids. I have no grandkids in the kindergarten classes here. But just to hear the things that the kids recited, the verses that they read or that they had memorized, it made me come out of there. And as an old man, I get teary-eyed more frequently than you would imagine. But I came out of there thinking, there just might be hope for this world. If there are more classes like this, more classes that I don't know about, there might be hope for this world. I'm going to leave you with this. Watching my parents is something that I did, and it's something that your kids are doing too. And I can remember driving, some of you men might know this, I've said this before, might be driving down the street, my dad was driving, and we would drive past a girl that was inappropriately dressed or showing more skin than she needed to, and I would watch my dad, and he never looked. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm a young teenager. I'm a middle teenager, whatever. And my dad wouldn't look. He never looked at that. And that really impressed me. In fact, I never saw my dad do anything wrong in all my life until this last year when my uncle, my mom's brother, her only sibling, offered them a small potted tree. And my dad said, "No, you can't have that tree." And I was like, "Dad, it's just a little tiny tree. I mean, it's no bigger than this. I don't want it in the yard." And I was, wow, that ruined your perfect record, Dad. You finally did something wrong. But I want you to remember that kids are watching. They're watching everything you do. They're watching what you do, what you say, to see if it matches what you do. And they might not be keeping a score on a paper, but they're keeping a score up here. So that's our lesson for today. Shepherding a child's heart and unbiblical goals. And I hope we can take something away from that. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this class. Thank you for their attention. Thank you for your guidance and your help with this lesson. Pray that you'll help us, Lord. We have the most important job in the world as parents. Help us to do that job to your glory, Lord, and help our kids to honor you and to love you, Lord, like we want them to. Bless us now as we go, and bring us back Sunday. In Jesus' name, amen. $7.59. Thank you for being such good students.